Hello and welcome to Zilog and Moto. I'm your host Dave, and this is the place to be if you're looking for in-depth reviews of Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X games. Basically, if you can play it in and around a Genesis with or without various add-ons, it's on my list. Somewhere. It's a big list. Now, I had an introduction for this video all written and ready to go, joking about how terrible the Nintendo 64 is, because that never gets old. And I was getting ready to really get into the meat of this week's review when something crazy happened. A larger, much more prominent YouTube channel decided to include me in their video this week about small channels, and my Friday got all kinds of nuts. My goal for the year, with my sort of slow but steady approach to things, was to hit 175 subscribers, which would have been 100 for the year, and that was in sight. I was up to about 140, and we still had a little more than 5 months to go. Well, as of the recording of this video, I'm up to 168 subscribers, so that goal is definitely in sight, and who knows, maybe we'll hit 200 instead. So thank you to Jenovi from Genovi's Retro Impressions for that, and also thank you to all you new subscribers that are seeing these videos for the first time, and of course thank you to all the old subscribers that have been keeping me going for the past 2.5 years. Hopefully this video lives up to your expectations. Oh, and I'll be linking Genovi's video below, as there's 9 other channels included that you'll probably want to check out as well. Now that all that's out of the way, let's get to the main event, this week's review. I'm recording this video in mid-August, and that time of year in the United States means that it's time for football. And yes, I mean American football, not the kind with a round ball and goalies and red cards that the rest of the world is better at. Now, of course, games that actually count haven't started yet, but they're close. Oh, so close. So what better time than now to have a football video game up for review? Well, I suppose it's for the Super Bowl, but I think I'm going to reserve that for another popular franchise. For now, though, it's time to look at the second game in Sega's own professional football-based franchise, Joe Montana Football 2 Sports Talk Football. At least as far as the Genesis was concerned, Joe Montana 2 was released a year after the original game of the series, coming out in December of 1981, and about the same time as John Madden Football 92, in Sega's effort to compete with Electronic Arts for a second time. However, things were much different this time around. Rather than Sega use the same developer as Electronic Arts again, Park Place Productions, which resulted in the first game in both the John Madden Football and Joe Montana Football series being more similar than probably most people realize, Sega changed things up and instead chose to develop with Blue Sky Software for the job. Due to this change, Joe Montana 2 is a wildly different game from its predecessor, and as a result is much different from John Madden Football 92, as well as the games now no longer share the same code base. But as you're probably aware, different doesn't necessarily mean better, it just means different. But having said that, do the changes make Joe Montana 2 a better game than its predecessor? And how does it compare to the burgeoning John Madden series? Well, we'll get into all that, but first, a look at the package. And this is Joe Montana 2 Sports Talk Football. And that is the actual complete title of the game, as you can see by looking at the front cover here. But yeah, I'm just going to be referring to it as Joe Montana 2 for the bulk of the review because I'm lazy. Surprise, surprise. This copy is in really good shape, minus the hang tab. No, literally, it's minus the hang tab. The previous owners have cut it off. And it wasn't a clean removal either, as it's pretty jagged and ugly. This sort of thing irks me probably way more than it should. I mean, if you're going to cut up the box, at least make it clean. Take some pride in your butchery. Butchery? Butchering? Anyway, it's messed up. Don't remove hang tabs, kids. Aside from that, though, the rest of the case has held up incredibly well, with just a few very minor nicks and cuts that you'll have to look very closely to see. Along with the outer plastic protective cover being fully intact, the inner cover looks fantastic. It's been held tightly in place, so there's no edge wear at the top or bottom, and there's no water or sun damage, with the photo-based artwork looking just as good as it did 30 years ago. I like this cover a lot. It's relatively simple, to be sure, but just like they did for the original Joe Montana Football, there's a picture of Joe in a San Francisco 49ers red look-like jersey, smiling for the camera in an action shot. In fact, it looks so much like the picture from the cover of the first game that I'm willing to bet it's just an alternate shot from the same photo session, which coincidentally was probably also done at the same time as Sega's TV commercial for the first game. I'll link the video for that as well. Thankfully, someone out there was able to archive it, pull it off an old VHS tape or something. Aside from the cover art, what's this? First ever live play-by-play? Well, that certainly explains the sports talk football part of the title, and spoiler alert, this is not just for show, as I'll cover in a bit. Flipping over the back, and you can tell that even though this is an earlier title due to its black cross-hatching background, it's a bit more advanced due to the green inset that makes things pop a bit. The included screenshots are all of nice quality and show different looks that the field can give you, and they even got a little creative, with one shot illustrating what looks like the game action zooming in for the standard view to the close-up view. Also, note the quotes in red at the top and at the bottom of the flavor text. These are actual examples of what you could potentially hear in-game during a play, which is really cool. Admittedly, the top line is a bit complex, and you're probably much more likely to hear something like, "He's back to pass, a beauty, first down," like it has at the bottom. But it could happen, and Montana is the only name that's said by the announcer, which I think is a nice touch considering that the game is named after him. One final note, look all the way down at the bottom in small print. It's got a note here about how the game is not licensed by the NFL, and we'll get into that more in the review, but I find it funny how they snuck that in just so people couldn't say that they were misled about the contents. Opening up the case, and we get the cartridge and manual in good shape. You can tell the manual has some heft to it, and that's because not only does it have a thorough explanation for how to play the game, with plenty of screenshots and lots of text. Seriously, I don't know if anyone's going to read all that. But then at the end, there's also a handy reference section that has the game's offensive and defensive playbooks diagrammed with a helpful description of each formation. Lastly, on the rear cover, there's an ad for Mario Lemieux Hockey, a game that I'm very familiar with the name, but due to how great EA's NHL series, I've never played it. Okay, that's the package. Let's get to the game itself and see if this is a mere sequel or something else entirely. Just based on the name alone, Joe Montana 2 Sports Talk Football might make you think that the game is simply an update of the previous Joe Montana Football, but with a few bells and whistles added, something that other sports game manufacturers are notorious for. However, this couldn't be further from the truth, and actually I'm having trouble thinking of a series that changed more from one edition to another while remaining on the same underlying console platform. I've already alluded to this in the intro where I mentioned how Sega switched developers in the game from Park Place Productions to Blue Sky Software. However, a game publisher switching developers or teams of developers between games in a series isn't exactly uncommon, and actually I'd say it's probably the opposite and happens more than you realize. Video game development and production is a business after all, and the environmental factors that allowed a certain game to be created might not exist the next time around. However, what is more common is that even though a game might be being worked on by a different group of people than what came before, the producers usually will push for a game to at least have similar look and feel to the previous title, so that the fans of those previous games in the series will get a product that will seem familiar to them. This is not the case with Joe Montana 2, and honestly, about the only thing that's the same about it and the original Joe Montana is that they both appeared on the Genesis. They're both games about American football, and they both use Joe Montana's name and likeness to promote the game. It's clear that Sega did not want to release another football game that was simply John Madden football from a different angle. And that's not a euphemism. Go watch episode 27 for more details, but Park Place Productions literally just changed the camera angle slightly between the two games so that they wouldn't look exactly the same. So, what makes Joe Montana 2 so much different from the first game? Well, let's start with the presentation. Rather than the vertical engine from the previous game that was used, where the offense was always moving toward the top of the screen, Joe Montana 2 features a horizontal field and has more in common with the Tecmo Bowl series. Due to this, the offense doesn't always move in the same direction, and depending on what quarter of the game it is, you'll be either heading to the right or to the left. Also, not only does this game have a zoomed out view that shows the entire field, it also has what it refers to as a 6x zoomed-in view, that's used whenever the quarterback either hands off or throws the ball, when there's a kick or punt return, and when there's a turnover and the defense grabs the ball. To me, this zoomed-in mode is key, as the graphics in the game's default view aren't the greatest, and appear to be a downgrade from the Madden engine. Every player on the team is identical, and there's not a ton of detail. However, once the game zooms in, well, the players are still identical, but they're much more detailed and feature a decent amount of animation per character. I'm not sure I'd say I enjoy it more than the Madden engine, but it's at least close, and I like the excitement that it generates when it switches to the zoomed-in mode. It gives the presentation a bit of an arcade feel, which is what you would expect from Sega. There's technically an option to turn off the zoomed-in mode if you want, but I don't know why you would ever want to do that due to the benefits that I just mentioned, and the fact that seeing the players in better detail allows you to make moves on offense that you wouldn't normally do. For instance, allowing you to wait until the last second to juke a defender and avoid a tackle, and let me tell you, it's very satisfying when you pull that off, especially when you break free for a touchdown. Beyond the totally revamped graphics engine, there's another major change to the game that's so important that they put it in the subtitle, Sports Talk Football. Joe Montana 2 was Sega's first game to feature sports talk, their name for the game having an actual announcer via synthesized speech samples. This same technology will be used in the next few iterations of the Joe Montana series, and Sega's College Football National Championship variant, and also the Sports Talk Baseball and World Series Baseball titles. But it all started with Joe Montana 2. I'm not sure I can properly put into words how cool it was to be playing these games as a kid, and having the computer announcing everything that was going on, rather than just the occasional touchdown or fumble. On modern games, this sort of thing is commonplace, with games like the 2K basketball series even having guest announcers to bring variety to the commentary so that you're not hearing the same lines every game. But in 1991, even having a small amount of digital speech was notable, much less a coherent voice that accurately called the action. The samples are a bit rough, as you might expect with the Genesis FM-based sound, and Sega trying to cram everything into an 8 megabit cartridge, but there's never any mistaking what the announcer is saying. One of my favorite lines in the game to this day is when you would do something crazy, like punt on second down, and the announcer would just exclaim disdainfully, "I can't believe it," almost mocking you for your decision. Finally, just like with the zoomed graphics mode, there is an option to disable the announcing, and I suppose some people might get sick of it after a few games, but again, I can't imagine doing it, as the speech is a large part of the game's charm. The sports talk announcer isn't the only way in which the game tries to resemble a sports broadcast. During the game, a stats screen is shown after scores and between quarters that shows things like the time of possession, first downs, running and passing yardage, complete with bar graphs, and then a few other offensive and special team stats, so that you can compare how the teams are doing against one another. Also, during the half, a studio-based cutscene is shown where the sports talk announcer is sitting behind a desk and going over the stats of the game while the stats screen is shown behind him. It's a small thing, but actually seeing the announcer, as opposed to him only being a disembodied voice, was a really nice touch, and something that I was totally not expecting. In another first for the series, Sega has replaced the playoff mode in the game with a full season mode. That's right, now not only can you play a single exhibition game, you can also embark on a quest to take on one of 28 teams through a 16-game schedule, and then challenge for the Sega Bowl Championship in an 8-team playoff. Progress through the season is saved by a password system rather than battery backup, but the passwords are relatively simple due to only having to keep up with the overall records of the teams versus any kind of accumulated stats. Its direct competitor, John Madden Football 92, didn't have this feature, and somewhat strangely, John Madden Football 93 didn't have it either, with Madden not getting a full season mode until the release of Madden 94, almost 2 years later. I was pretty shocked in doing the research on that, as that's a somewhat important feature for a sports game to not have, and just shows again how ahead of its time Joe Montana 2 was. Believe it or not, Joe Montana 2 contains yet another novel feature, and that's Dream Team mode. So, even though the game doesn't have a NFL or NFL Players Association license, all the teams in the game are based on real-life teams. For instance, the New York Giants are represented by New York National League, which competes in the National League East along with Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington, and Phoenix, just like the NFC East was in 1991. Confusingly, not all the teams have the same colors that you would expect them to have, and I'm not sure why they did that, unless that was just their attempt to try to be different enough to not get sued. But beyond the appearances and names of the teams, they also feature actual players, just simply referred to by their uniform number instead of their name, aside from Montana. You can't see this in-game, other than in their play on the field, but you can see this in Dream Team mode, which allows you to pick and choose a quarterback, 2 running backs, and 3 wide receivers to replace the players on your team, if you want to trade up or just have a favorite player that you want to use. This Dream Team that you can create can only be used in exhibition games and not season mode, but after creating the team, the game will present you with a password, allowing you to enter that password and use that team as assembled going forward without you having to pick out the players again. Dream Team isn't as much of a selling point as some of these other features I've mentioned, but it's definitely a nice to have, and it foreshadows some of the other game modes that would come in the future involving custom team building and creation. So far, you might have noticed that I've been pretty favorable to Joe Montana 2, and I think for good reason. And you might be thinking, okay, so where's the catch? Well, one of the reasons why the John Madden football series has been so popular over the years is because the game controlled so well. Joe Montana 2? Not so much. It certainly doesn't control badly, mind you, and is completely playable, but it does have some quirks. Going along with the arcade feel I mentioned earlier, the game's controls are very simple. When running with the ball, you can attempt to power through a tackle by hitting B, or dive with C, and that's it. No spinning, no turning on the jets to get around a corner, nothing. Also, when moving your character, each player feels like they have momentum, and changing direction can be a huge issue. I appreciate the realism of players not being able to stop on a dime, but Joe Montana 2 takes things a bit too far, and counterplays are nearly useless as a result. Finally, when you go to pass, you have to hit the A button to bring up a target arrow over a receiver, and then hit B if you want to switch to a different receiver, before finally hitting A again to throw. This is another similarity to Tecmo Bowl, but in that game, usually your offensive line would provide you with at least a few seconds to let the play develop. And often in Joe Montana 2, you don't have that extra time to iterate between receivers. Many times I ended up just throwing the ball quickly, hoping for the best, which isn't really what you want in a football game. Despite the clear need for polish in certain areas, after getting used to the game's quirks, I ended up having a lot of fun, much in the same manner as my experience with the original Joe Montana football, as I simply wasn't expecting to have as good a time as I did. However, Joe Montana 2 exceeds the original in just about every conceivable way, and the running play-by-play announcer along with the full season capabilities make the game stand out as being truly ahead of its time. As a result, I'm giving Joe Montana 2 Sports Talk Football 4 stars. It's just a fantastic title for December of 1991, and more than a solid alternative to the John Madden football series. Okay, that was Joe Montana 2 Sports Talk Football. After playing this, I'm really curious to see how Sega followed up the next year with NFL Sports Talk Football 93 starring Joe Montana, as the bar has been set pretty high. And yes, that is the real title of the next game, due to Sega bringing in the NFL license and trying to move away from Joe Montana as the face of the franchise. It gets very confusing, especially when Deion Sanders enters the picture a few years later. Next week on Zilog and Moto, it's not a sports title, and it's not even a Genesis or Mega Drive title either, as instead it's Master System time again. I'll be looking at a game that I remember seeing its name in magazines back in the day due to its Japanese release on the Mega Drive, but this instead is its European exclusive Master System release a few years later. It's a port of an arcade game that I've never played, but Galloping Ghost does have it, so maybe I'll get over there to try it out at some point. We'll see. Please remember to subscribe if you like this video, and remember, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.